Welcome to GM Tips. GM Rick here. I have got the Paragon DM joining me for these awesome episodes. This one at least. And we're going to have some fun tonight getting to know him, talking a little bit on an interesting topic that he and I talked about. So I'll let him introduce that when we get there. But tell us a little bit about yourself, Paragon DM.
Sure. Well, I'm Canadian. I'll just get that out of the way. So I apologize in advance because a good Canadian does. The biggest thing about me is just I am an RPG fanatic, both video games and board games.
Awesome.
I've been playing, for as long as I can remember. It was one thing that I started as a kid. I got into Dungeons and Dragons probably at age 12, pushing 40 now. So this has been a lifelong adventure for me. Playing games, running games for almost as long as I've been playing.
Awesome.
So a lot of experience. Just, I don't say that to say that I know everything because I've been playing for so long, but it's just this is what I love to do. I love Dungeons and Dragons specifically. I love role playing games. I love reading fantasy novels and immersing myself in fantasy worlds, whether it's something that I've created or made with players or that I'm reading that somebody else has made. It's just a big passion of mine, and it's something that I spend a lot of time, maybe too much time, thinking about and immersing myself in. That's the gist of it. I mean, so my passion is really what drives me when it comes to D&D, and even in, I've started creating some stuff, some homebrew content, and it all just comes from a place of passion. I just love the game.
Well, let me ask you this: which edition did you start D&D with?
I started with Advanced D&D 2nd Edition.
Awesome.
Yeah, with good old Thaco back in the day.
Yeah, the Thaco and then the broken... See, people complain today about how long combat takes, either in D&D 3035 or the new 5e, or even in Pathfinder. And I want to take them back to 2.0.
Yeah.
And say, it's the only game that you could take 3 rounds in 3 hours.
Yeah.
An hour around.
Yeah, it took a long time to get stuff done. So
people don't realize how spoiled they are in today's generation with rounds. Because
it's true. And I mean, you think about it, like originally when D&D was created, very narrow audience. I think is even who it was intended for. It was intended for people who were kind of already into war games, miniatures, and stuff, and very, very small audience. And now it's a big audience. So even from a rule set standpoint, I think they've had to broaden that and think about, okay, how do we make this as accessible and as playable for as many people as possible? So that's been a big change that I've seen.
And I agree with that, and how do you like the changes? I mean, looking just kind of at where it's gone from, to 2nd edition to now.
Yeah.
Where do you see
I really like it, actually. I'm a big fan of 5th edition. That's primarily what I play. I even went through 4th. I slogged my way through 4th, which...
I'm sorry.
My take on 4th, what I tell people is I don't mind it as just like kind of a separate thing, like as a separate RPG game. It has its fun moments. As a D&D rule set, not so much. But it was still enjoyable, and actually a lot of players that I ended up playing with, I actually introduced to the game through 4th edition, and then converted over to 5th. So it wasn't all bad. It brought some new people to the game. But where 5th is, I actually really like where 5th is going, and I especially like how open it's become and how accessible it is to the community. So many people can kind of put their own spin on it and create their own content. And even, Jeremy Crawford has said multiple times that, what you do at your table, like it's your game, run it how you want.
Yep.
And I like that. I really like that it's not quite as rule heavy. Doesn't mean the rules aren't there and they don't apply, but it's more freeform. It's more about allowing the DM and the players to just have fun and run with it and play whatever game they want to play based off of kind of the basic rules. So I really like where things are going at this point.
So how did you like Xanathar's when it came out with his little addendums and rules? What was your take on there, and what did you come away with liking out of that book?
The biggest thing I like about Xanathar's is the questions about character backstory. I wrote a blog about that, about backwards character creation, where my challenge is always think about who this person is before thinking about what their class is, what their whatever, like who are they actually as a person. And I think that really brings out a lot more of the role play elements of the game. And I think what Xanthars has done is they've really done a good job of addressing some of those questions. What was your childhood like? What was your home like? Did you have any friends? How many friends? What were the reasons why you became a monk? Not just, well, I'm a monk. Well, yeah, why?
Exactly.
What was your master like? What are the tenets of the temple that you became a monk at? So they ask a lot of these questions and guiding questions, and you can roll on the table, or you can just kind of pick one, or even just use that question as a springboard to kind of create your own story off of it. But it from what I've seen, is it allows people, and it gets people thinking about more than just, I'm this class, this race, here's my abilities. It's okay, but who are you?
See, that was
how do you embody this character and become them?
And see, that's one of the things I liked about Pathfinder. Even though it had its clunkiness, when it came to the ultimate campaign setting, and now what they're doing in second edition, from what I'm seeing, everything is based on your background. They're not even calling it races anymore. They're calling it your backstory, which I really like that, because how your character is going to get to where it is and how it's going to evolve from there is going to play into that backstory. And I think players miss out on that. They so often want to get to the end result. Hey, I'm Wolverine, or I'm this, or I'm that, or I'm Deadpool, and they forget what went into that person becoming what they were.
Right. Those characters have a long backstory, especially like something like Wolverine. He's got 200 years worth of backstory going on.
Back to the Civil War days, and people don't realize that, and what it did to him. Having that power that he could live, and his slow metabolism, and even though it fixed his wounds, he didn't age, and that. So those kind of stories, if you play them in, it's what enriches that experience.
Yeah, and I agree. Absolutely, yeah.
And I think it would be great to see how you address that. Now we're going to hit into the topic you wanted to discuss, and I'll have some questions regarding backstory with that, because I think that's going to play into the topic as well. So I'll open it up. Go ahead, be my guest on the topic you want to discuss, and let's dig in on it.
Sure. One thing that just to get a little bit more about myself, I love kids. And I specifically love bringing kids to the table and teaching them Dungeons and Dragons. I get really excited about the next generation, so to speak.
Good point.
I love playing with players I have. I have players that have been playing with me a long time, and I'm not. I don't want to say that I don't have fun doing that. I absolutely have fun, but I actually think I have more fun when I'm sitting at a table with a bunch of new players that have never played the game before. And I've had the opportunity to do that a lot with youth and with children as well, having some mixed table dynamics as well, and just seeing how kids approach the game is in some ways the same, but in many ways it's very different from how adults approach the game, and I actually find it really refreshing to play with kids. So just through these different experiences, I've had a lot of time to think about, how do I do this differently with kids, because there are some things that need to be done differently. Even from one of the big things I found is kind of from a rating standpoint, if you want to think about it that way. Yep. You gotta tone things, certain mature themes you gotta tone down a little bit for kids. So you gotta get your head in a different bit of a headspace when you're thinking about that. But they do tend to play differently. And it's been a challenge in some ways, but also a blessing. Absolutely very beneficial to sit around the table with younger players and just see how they approach the game and what their take on it is. And it brings me back to my days when I first started. Like I said, I started at age 12 and remembering the hazy memories I have from back then. For me, D&D was an escape. It's kind of the very stereotypical thing, but it was an escape, and it was somewhere where I got to pretend and just let my imagination run wild. And I think today's kids are no different, right? They still want to unleash their imagination, whether they're good at it or not yet, whether they have found outlets for that, it's there. They have this fresh imagination, and so being able to see children have an avenue for that, have a place where they can just imagine, just pretend, and get into it is really fascinating, and it's really enjoyable. It's a big passion of mine. I'm actually teaching my 5-year-old son. He just turned 5, and so I've started to play very, very basic idea of the game, but I've started to play with him And to be honest, I haven't even used like any of the rules. Just very basic concept of like good versus evil. You're this guy. You have this. This guy's here. What do you want to do? You're in this room. What do you want to do? Just kind of guiding him through the very basics. And his imagination is just like leaps and bounds above my own. And just seeing him run with it has been a lot of fun. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
That's
bringing
awesome.
him into. I'll slowly kind of introduce him to the rules and bring him into, how to play, so to speak. But he already has what I think is the essential of D&D, and that's just imagination.
So do you use a lot of props, like physical props, to help them to picture more, or give them at least a view of the game?
I do. I switch back and forth between Theater of the Mind and using miniatures and battle maps, depending on who I'm playing with, I find, actually. I don't really... Neither one is really like my go-to. I don't swear by Theater of the Mind or by miniatures. Whatever's available, whatever kind of works for the situation, I go with. For him, definitely. I think that's one thing with kids that I've noticed is that if there is something to aid in their visualization, it's at least, again, it starts as kind of a springboard for their imagination. They can fill in the gaps. They can fill in the rest, even if it's just a dry erase map with a couple lines drawn to make a room. They can fill in the idea, but I have noticed that some sort of physical representation helps to just kind of engage them in what's happening. Yeah, whereas maybe adults, I don't know. I'm not saying they can't do Theater of the Mind, but from my experience, it's been a tool has been helpful to just guide them in thinking, oh, I see this, now I'm going to fill this out.
So do you like print off any aids or things like that for picture visualization that you show them? Like some of the adventures I know have, aid A, aid B, picture this, picture that.
Not all the time. Very occasionally I'll find an image online, like a picture of a monster or something like that. I tend to just use more my own description. Okay. If I'm describing a monster, I like to describe things almost in the vein of Robert Jordan. Some people say I might get a little bit too over descriptive, but he's an author who greatly influenced me in world building and even just thinking about environments and stuff. Because I found when I was reading through the Wheel of Time series that the way he described things, like I felt like I was there.
Yeah.
He had such an incredible way of just putting his words together and drawing this picture that I could read those stories and be like, I totally see that. I can totally see what he's talking about. And so I've tried my best to emulate that in my descriptions when I'm playing the game. I try to be as descriptive without it being dry. You can be descriptive and dry. I try to make it engaging, but I rely more on that than on pictures or anything like that. I mean, I have like miniatures that I'll use, like a rope or something like that. But if there's no miniature available or describing the locations, I just verbally will describe. Here's where you are. Here's what it looks like.
Sure. I mean, the tactiles, when you think about it, the sounds that they hear, so I could see with a group like that, if you had a sirenscape for the sounds, or if you have other things, it just evokes pictures when they hear or sense or smell or touch. Yeah, it can really evoke a lot of pictures in the mind.
Absolutely. And I've really appreciated Matthew Mercer on a Critical Role. I mean, the sounds that he uses. If they're in a tavern, you've got tavern sounds in the background.
Yep.
He's got generic music for parts of it, but when there's something specific happening, he's got a very specific audio file in the background. And sometimes you don't even notice it until you do. Kind of, oh, I just noticed there's those sounds there, but it's helped to build the environment. Yeah, for sure.
No, and I was going to ask you too with it. Again, you mentioned some of the things already with kids, but what do you see in your prep work is probably the biggest challenge when you're prepping a session for a younger audience?
I'd say excitement is key, and yeah, prepping is definitely different for different groups that I've played with. With kids, the biggest thing I keep in mind is shorter attention span.
Okay.
On average. So what am I going to do? What am I doing as a DM? Sometimes I don't need to. Sometimes they'll just run with it totally, and it's great. But what are ways that I can keep things going, keep the pace up, keep things
Mm-hmm.
engaged if I find that they're kind of and I've had kids, they start fiddling or you're doing something else, they've kind of zoned out when it's somebody else's turn, they're just kind of they're doing their own thing. And so what can I do to try and engage them? So I think about that as a DM. I get very excited. I put notes for myself like stand up. I use a lot of hand gestures. I try to bring the excitement myself. And that's a little bit, I can tone that down a little bit when I'm playing with experienced players. I'm playing my home group. We know each other. I don't have to be the one kind of driving it so much. And I don't want to say that kids can't drive it. I definitely don't want to say that. They're fully capable of totally getting in. Once they've gotten in the story, they can take it and run with it. But just keeping in mind, that there's thanks to where society's at, our kids do have shorter attention spans on average, unfortunately. It's just reality we live in, right? So with that, how do I keep them engaged? And so I tune my stories a little bit to that, where it's a little bit more excitement, a little bit more action that's going to keep their interest at the table.
So do you use voices with them? Try to emulate different voices for that? How do they take that? Do they get into it and try to do it themselves?
Oh, yeah. They love it. Yeah. I'm a big voice guy. I do voices for all my campaigns. I try to voice my NPCs as much as possible. The way I look at it is that this is my chance to roleplay, right?
Yep.
A lot of being a DM is kind of you're setting the ground, you're setting the stories and stuff. But when you're acting out the role of even the monsters, right? Now I get to get into it. I get to have some fun, and I get to let my imagination go wild. So when I build NPCs, I try to think about what do they sound like, what are their mannerisms. And with kids, definitely, I go over the top. I do my most outrageous Scottish accent I can for a dwarf, or facial expressions. I definitely get very animated because they're going to be more engaged with that, I think.
And I think it's true. As adults, I think we get more self-conscious than we do around the younger audience. So, but I've kind of go over that because I've got my different accents I use in my game, and the players like it because depending on the tone of voice and what they hear, it stokes within them. And I think one of the greatest things that we had, one of my players was if I'm talking, I'm lying rogue type.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And it was so great just having the debates going back and forth with me and him, and then the other players jumping in as their characters. And it was so much fun because you could just feel everybody just sink into it. And that's the thing I like. And you don't get it every session necessarily, but you go for it. And
for sure.
Now, with the younger players, do you provide more of a background for them, or do you help them to think through the steps of developing?
It honestly depends from person to person. I've had one group I had that I played with had never played D&D before at all. It was a brand new introduction. They had no idea what the game was even about. So I kind of provided some pre-made characters, but I left the name up to them. I left, I kind of asked them, why do you think your character is here? Like, what is their goal? Why are they in this town? Why are they on the path that they are, to try and help them think about that stuff. So I kind of had the basics set up. Okay, so you're an elf wizard. Here's your abilities. That's great. Whatever. I never want to write a backstory for them though, because I think I feel like that is something that they need to do for themselves if they're really going to own a character. And I'll definitely help them if needed. Some kids are going to be really good at that. They're going to be like, oh, his name is this, and he grew up in the woods, and he had this friend, and they'll just run with it. Whereas other kids will have a little bit more of a struggle, and I'll be there to make sure that there's enough elements. It doesn't have to be this big drawn out 5-paragraph backstory of the character, but enough kind of key elements that will help them to really get their head into who this character is. But I would never write it for them. I almost think that's like a violation.
It kind of is.
To write somebody's backstory, even from a kid, it just doesn't seem right to do.
Well, it doesn't let them own it. Again, when you sit there, and again, there's times for that, like a one-shot where you're sitting at an event, say like Gen Con right now, which is going on.
Sure, exactly, yeah.
There's a time for that. But I always love when someone steps in and takes their flair. Like we had 2 young players come into our Pathfinder session, and again, this is if you ever done society type of games, it's not far off of the D&D ones that they do the same way, where they
The
have,
Adventures League.
the Adventures League. So
Yeah.
you have to have almost set things. But I love
True,
that
yeah.
one of them. Now again, this is a little more, I think, above the level maybe where you're at with some of them. But these two 18-year-old girls came in, and they'd played D&D before. They'd never played Pathfinder. So they
Right.
grabbed one of the preset characters and said, "Can I run my character polyamorous?" And I'm like, "Yeah, why not? I mean,
Yeah.
if that's where you want to take them, yeah."
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and
yeah.
what I found is they were able to discern more information, even in a one-shot, out of the NPCs, because I allowed them to use that ability to them.
Right.
What would happen? Is there pillow talk? Is there, we didn't get real into the actual
Right.
activity.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
it gave them the ability to use skill sets that they couldn't have used
That's awesome.
otherwise.
Yes.
And it was so much fun. And even the event coordinators go, "That was great that you let them do this." And I'm like, well, I'm all about letting them take a path with their abilities and their background and utilize it. Why wouldn't you? Because it's something you could do in everyday life. So why couldn't you in a fantasy setting? So that's really neat that you let them do that, because then it gives them that unique flair to utilize their backstory to maybe garner things they wouldn't otherwise get if you'd have written their story for them.
Absolutely. And I, my DMing style is, I don't like to say no. There are times you need to say no, but I tell all my players, right, like, be as creative as you possibly can be imaginative, and ask me if you can do something, right? And if there's a way for it to work, then I'll figure it out. And so even with backstories, if you want an element in your backstory, if you want your character to have, element A or element B, let's make it work. Right, rather than saying, well, that won't fit or whatever, I'm just saying, yeah, if that's what you want to be, that's who you want your character to be, then let's run with it. Let's make it work. Because especially from a kid's point of view, if they feel restrained at all, or they feel confined in rules or even in ideas, they're not going to be as engaged. If they have the freedom to just let their imagination run wild and say, well, my character is this and my character that, and to hear that affirmation, to hear somebody say, yeah, absolutely, immediately you see the eyes just, oh, okay, cool, I didn't know I could do that, and there's an instant like engagement with the story where now they understand my ideas actually mean something.
That's a very good point.
My imagination is part of this game, and this person who's running the game wants to hear my ideas. Wow, that's I think for a lot of kids, think the way that the school system is structured, at least from here, what I've experienced in Canada as well, is that it's very rigid. There's some room for imagination, but it's still very structured and very rigid. And so to give a kid the ability to just run wild and to have that affirmed is an eye opener for them. And every time I've seen them latch onto it and just instantly, they're going to buy into that character. They're going to buy into the game that much more, because now they actually have input, and that's, for some of them, that's new. That's something they haven't experienced before, where they get to have a voice and it actually matters. And it's like, whoa, okay, I can do this.
Well, see, as a dad of 3, I've had, I've got the gambit. I've got a 21, a 19, and a 7. Each of them have had something on the autistic spectrum. Like, for instance, my oldest has ADD. She's a great teacher. She's going to go into teaching. Great heart, loves kids, but you can see when her mind races. And same with my son with ADHD, my 19-year-old. And then the 7, she's ultra creative. I love it. In fact, I don't stifle. She'll be watching a movie, and she'll be acting it out as if she's talking to them in the room. And I do not quell that at all. Because I believe you have to have that kind of imagination in life if you're going to be creative and think past things. And at the same time, I let her know, hey, when you're in school, kids are not going to understand you're talking to these invisible imaginary friends. Just keep that in mind. They're going to look at you and go. And the great thing is she's got an aide that's an old friend of Kim's, my fiance's, that she's talking with, that comes over once a week and helps her to understand how to interact with other kids. Because it's funny because we don't think about how do we get that social interaction with kids, and gaming is one of those environments.
Absolutely, definitely.
it develops that confidence when you're sitting there with other kids that may not know as much either.
Yeah.
But they're learning it, and so together you come together as that party and learn how to interact with each other.
Well, I find it's a safe space for them to explore their imagination as well, because especially like I said, like at my tables, I try to not say no unless I have to, and so it really it just lets them run free, and they can pretend to be somebody else, and they're allowed to pretend. Pretending isn't wrong.
That's right.
So talking to that imaginary friend, for example, I mean, well, you're talking to a lot of imaginary characters because none of them actually exist.
Yes,
right?
You are.
Every character that exists in a game, whether it be an NPC that the DM is running or the characters themselves, they're all made up. They're all pretend, and so any interaction that you're having is totally on that level of pretend.
Yep.
And for them to be able to engage in that and be able to be encouraged to engage in that, I think it gives them that avenue to express themselves and not feel like it's looked down upon or wrong in any way. They can just have fun.
Well, and looking into that now, do you find that the longer term campaigns are tougher to do with a younger audience than, say, an older audience?
I do think so. I think it depends on the content of the campaign. But a long-term campaign, I had a campaign with my home group here that was run over a span of about 5 years. And the reason for that was just scheduling, right? It's the bane of every D&D group, where, especially when we've all got families and kids and responsibilities, and it's like, okay, just trying to get time to sit down and play.
Yep.
And so it's spread out over a long period of time, and it was easier to kind of come back in and say, okay, we were reading the story, we can pick that up kind of right where we were. For kids, I think shorter campaigns work better because they're going to get bored easier.
Yeah.
As imaginative as they are, as creative as they are, if it's one story or one thing is taking a long time, they're going to reach a point where they're kind of like, okay, well, what's next? And that's not every kid.
Right.
There are other kids who, like me, like I was reading Tolkien, and when I was in like public school, I had, and I loved it. I dove in, but I mean, even take a look at a lot of the fiction that young readers are reading in it. They're shorter books, shorter stories.
Sadly,
TV shows are shorter, half an hour instead of an hour, things like that. And yeah, I think shorter, but I think there's something in the psychology of it too, where people who are writing or creating for that audience, they understand that shorter is potentially better. And even with books, right? You see with young reader books where you can have, one story that's maybe played over like 9 different books. And so that each book is a little bit shorter, and it gives them a little bit of a snippet, and then they can read it kind of segmented, as opposed to one giant book that's 800 pages.
The 5-minute stories. You'll find a lot of those 5-minute stories now that are that way. Now, what's funny is, though, now with the 7-year-old, and I've noticed this, it depends on how much the writer understands the different things like humor. For instance,
that's true.
We've started a set of books by Nick Bruhl called Bad Kitty.
Okay.
Bad Kitty is hilarious. If you haven't read it, even as an adult, you need to read it. It's just funny as heck. Yeah. And she can sit there, and her attention span, I can read 80 pages. She is not even unglued from it.
That's fantastic.
And that tells me that if we do the right kind of content, like for instance, I saw this stuff. I don't know if you've looked at Monty Cook Games and the game that Shanna Germain came out with what is it? No to Evil, the No to Evil.
Oh, No Thank You Evil.
No Thank You Evil. I love that they did a concept like that for kids.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, that
to me, that's saying you're getting to that audience and you're building into them.
Right.
The idea, because other than D&D, simplistic D&D, there is nothing else. Well, I won't say there's a couple games that are out there for kids, but not many. And most of them, even those, are pretty intricate. And she just really made it rules light, and I love that, to really engage the kids at a young age. And you can start them at like 4 or 5 with that game. And for me, I love that as a GM, because I think, gosh, that kid's going to benefit so much coming through that.
Absolutely.
Because somebody took the time to really look at that. And you know, I guess my biggest thing is what kind of tools do you use, besides maybe the story and some of the things we talked about, to really build the interest with the younger audience in a game?
To be honest, I found that the interest is already there. If I can be straight, like I've had so I DM at the Watchtower restaurant here in town, and we have an open D&D night once a month. And interestingly enough, like when I started up, I had no idea who my players were going to be. In the very first game, I had 2 kids under 12.
Wow.
The next game, I had 4 kids under 12. And you know, I've had multiple kids come to the table, and they were just into it right from the get-go.
Awesome.
And I think the interest, just maybe not necessarily D&D. They don't necessarily know what D&D is, but the interest in role play, the interest in kind of playing out an adventure, I think is there. And so I think I like to tap into what they already like. So I've had things where I've asked kids, okay, well, what do you like to play? What video games like?
Uh-oh. I didn't lose you. Please tell me I didn't lose you. Oh, I love bandwidth. I know we will have Craig back in about 2 seconds. So for those of you watching, I'm sorry for that. That's kind of the bandwidth thing. I gotta love bandwidth. Are you there?
I can hear you.
Yeah, you're back. That's what I was
Okay.
laughing and saying on here. I gotta love bandwidth, because that's a
Yeah.
concept all on its own self.
Oh, gee,
One minute
technology.
you could be going through an amazing point, and then your bandwidth goes.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, what I was saying is I like to relate it to something that they already know. I think that's a great tool.
That's a good
Make
point.
it familiar. So, you know, depending on the age group, if they're into like Ninja Turtles, or younger kids are into like PJ Masks, or even My Little Pony,
Yeah.
whatever it is they're into. You know, I have kids, so I've watched a ton of these shows, and you can find storylines in there where I can say, oh, you know what, I know how to make that a D&D story. Just change a few things, and I can make this an adventure that they can jump into. And it's going to be something that they're familiar with, because they go, oh yeah, this is like that episode that I watched, or this character is kind of like that character, and instantly they're engaged because there's something familiar, and kids latch on to familiar, right? When they see a character or they see something that they know that they love. Like my 5-year-old, doesn't matter what show he watches, as soon as that show is done, he's playing that in the living room with his daughter, or with my daughter. That's what they play, right? They latch onto that idea, and they run with it, and they go, well, now let's play this out. And so since they already kind of have that, they have the ability to take something familiar and then expand the story and play with it in a different way. We've already got the tools right there to jump them into something like D&D, where we say, oh, you liked Paw Patrol. Okay. Well, in this story, your group you have to go fix the bridge in town that is out, and here's this, and you run it kind of similarly to something that they are familiar with, and they just latch on. And they're going to run with it. They're going to run with it themselves, and they're going to take it, so that you don't have to be the one saying, you know, here's where the story goes. They get it, and they'll take it from there.
Well, have you noticed some of the campaigns? I laughed about this. They have Pathfinder. They have Pony Finder. No joke. My Little Pony's based Pathfinder.
Hey,
and then they have another one that's based off of Snow White. And
There
the
you
whole
go.
story was Snow White. And I was like, guys, you guys are getting it. You got to get settings.
Yeah,
because what
that's
you
it.
hear from people that want to dive into Sandbox, which, you know, sometimes great for kids, sometimes not, you got to get those settings. And some of it is all about the settings.
Yes.
Finding that right environment, like you said, that they can relate to. And so I'm so glad so many more games are finding that out and figuring it out.
Absolutely,
There's more things than just post-apocalypse or heroes or shadow.
Yes.
There is so much more.
Yeah.
And in fact, a game
great.
that I want to see more people playing is Open Legend RPG. I don't know if you looked at that.
Yeah.
I got that from, oh my gosh, love it. Because
that's one that Ed Greenwood.
Ed
Mercer,
was
or was
involved with it, but the guy who did that was, oh my gosh, Brian Feister. Brian came up with the whole concept, put it out on a website.
Right. Yeah.
And then I got the book, and I love it because you literally can adapt this. it's better than like a Savage World or a Fate system that you can adapt it to whatever environment, and it's really
that's
fluid.
yeah.
And you can make your own classes, your own things. I'm like, wow, what a great thing for a GM.
Absolutely, yeah.
You don't have to do all that. You can let your players bring you a class and say, I want to do this. And you're like, okay, follows the framework, uses the right things. I'm there.
Well, and that's like I even run 5th edition that way, right? Like I'm all about homebrew, whether it be myself or if somebody comes to me, a player comes to me and says, hey, I have this idea. My initial response is, well, let's see how we can make that work. Instead of, well, no, that won't work, or no, that's not canon or whatever. Like, who cares about that? Can it work? Can we fit it in, and will it be fun? Then let's do it. Who cares? Let's make it fit somehow. So, especially with kids, if kids have an idea, okay, let's do that. Let's make it. Especially for kids, right? They want to play their game, and it's
they do.
The biggest thing to remember as a DM always, I think, is that it's not my game, right? It's collective. It's a collective game, but it really, for the players, it is their game, and kids want to feel like it's their game. So if they're just playing my game, they're going to get bored. They're going to say, well, that's great, you're having fun, but if I'm playing their game, that's a totally different story. That's where they're engaged. That's where they're excited, and they're going to jump into it. So yeah, things like that, like Open Legend, or things that allow for other settings where you can just really have a lot of fun and open creativity. Definitely, use as many of those things as possible, I think, for kids.
And I think it's a great thing. And I think you're hitting a lot of great points. But, the neat thing is it's all adaptable also to adults.
Absolutely.
Just in a different way. And I think looking at it from the coin, I think you hit it. And I know I've hit it before in some of my tips, is that it's not about, we start out with it as a concept as a GM. We start out with an idea and maybe a framework in our mind. But at the end of the day, it really is the player's game.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if we don't let it be the player's game, then we're going to lose our players.
Absolutely.
And I've even done where, like, for instance, I'm an adapter. With the time I have, I can't sit down and create a sandbox like I used to. So what I'll do is I'll take a setting. So Pathfinder, Galarian. I'll let them write the story, the history going forward, everything. Because it is their system. It is their game.
Yeah.
It is not written. So then if new modules come out, that's fine. I adapt it into the ongoing story.
Sure, yeah.
And open it up so that they can go explore, go places. There's a time for, how should I say, a more linear path or a linear story.
Definitely.
But it shouldn't be always. It should be almost like a spider web. I love the theory of the spider web.
Yeah.
Each time you're doing something adds to the spider web.
You're creating a different strand. Yeah, absolutely.
Main story's still there. It just is interconnected in different ways than what it was.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think with kids, the neat thing is you're really open. It's much more even than a spider web. It's literally open, from what you're saying, an open-ended thing. Where do you want to go? Which one do you want to do today?
And for especially from a kid's point of view, it's going to be different each time they sit down at the table, and it's going to be influenced by, again, whatever they've consumed that week or that month or whatever, from entertainment standpoint, from what they've been reading, whatever has been fueling their imagination, they're going to bring that to the table, and it might be different, from the last time they came, and so you have to be ready to adapt to that and let them run with their imagination, and they might be interested in something else this time.
Yeah.
Right, and that's okay. That's totally okay, because they're still trying to figure out who they are too, right? As adults, like, I've had a lot of time to discover what my passions are, and even within those passions to discover the things that I like and the things that I don't like about that. They're kind of still in that infancy stage, almost literally, where they're exploring that still.
Oh yeah.
And so they're going to come, 1 week they might be totally into the action and they're having a blast, and the next week they come and they're bored by the action all of a sudden. You go, well, what happened? That's how you love this. But their mind is somewhere totally different, because that's just how kids' minds work, right? That they want to do something else this week. They want to just explore. They want to loot the crates in the dungeon. That's their big thing this week. And so, okay, you gotta just kind of go with it, right? And
the funniest thing is that you think about it. And this goes in the biologics, is they've got connections in their brain we don't have.
Yes.
And to a certain age, they have those connections, and then those connections drop. And so, like, at 7, they're going to have much more connectivity, and 5 in their brain. than what we have at 21, 22, 23. So they're able to switch gears in ways we don't.
Definitely.
Literally because we don't have that available to us anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
And
we
so
work a
that's
little bit
the
slower
neat
even.
thing is that they really do make you think outside the box as a GM. I mean, I have had my 18-year-old. It was funny. He was 15 at the time. And there were times he was totally engaged. There were other times you could tell his mind was off somewhere else. Again, some of it's the ADHD, but, I have to, it's almost like table rule for me is put away the electronics, put away all your little toys.
Definitely, yeah.
Let's try to use what's there at that time. And that's the hardest thing, I think. Because like you said, the attention span of a kid is so much more limited. We're talking maybe 15 minutes at most of full engagement. Yeah. And then they're off to something else. And if you're good as a GM and you can think about that, then you're staying with them. Otherwise, it's gone.
Absolutely, yeah. Short attention spans, but heightened creativity. So there's the catch, right? Where for the time that you've got them, their mind is just exploding with possibilities, and then you got to make the best of that in that time that you have them engaged. So it's making the most of every moment with them for sure.
Absolutely. Well, are there any more other thoughts? I was going to kind of wrap it down here. I mean, great stuff, by the way.
Well, I think if I can, like one thing that I've really appreciated about having kids at the table is watching adults learn from them. I've had mixed tables at again at the open D&D night we run. I had a couple of kids under 12, and then there was one of their dads was playing, and then had another guy come in who was probably like late 20s, and there's always that kind of nervous at first. I'm like, oh, okay, how am I going to make this work? Because there's such a huge age gap here. And the kids just ran with the story that I'd put together, and they were jumping into it, and they were just having fun. And what I noticed was the genuine smiles around the table, where the adults were kind of just, okay. And you could see them loosen up, and just, it drew them into the game because, I mean, even for myself, like I can't help it. I see kids exploring and having imagination, just going wild, and it can't help but bring a smile to your face because you go, I wish I could still imagine like that. And so I think what kids bring to the table is a reminder of what imagination looks like, which I think something that adults some of us are really good at it, but even then we forget. We temper our imagination. We're hesitant in a lot of ways. We're just because of our experiences in life and just because of maturity that's come in, right? We think differently. We even imagine differently. Our creativity is different. But to see a kid with this fresh creativity that's not really burdened by anything, it's a teachable moment for us, where for adults, whether DM or player, we can look at it and say, oh yeah, that's what it's like to pretend to be somebody else. Awesome. And I've seen adults, who probably wouldn't normally voice act or really put much thought into kind of that, because the kids at the table are doing it and they're playing as their characters. Then this one guy, he was, I think he was probably like mid-20s and very quiet, very shy at the table. And through one of these sessions, this was a few months ago at the restaurant there, through the session, he got more and more into his character and his voice. He actually started to voice act more. So by the end of the session, he was full on like into his character, voice acting and interacting with the kid across the table, like they were having these conversations, character to character. And I'm just sitting there with this big stupid grin on my face, being like, "This is awesome!" Like, I wish every adult could see this and learn from this, and just remember the joy, remember the just the exuberance of pretend, and just let it go. Right? Just let it go. Let yourself imagine. Let yourself be a kid again for a second. Because when we're playing, D&D or Pathfinder or whatever it is, it's an opportunity for us to be a kid again.
It really is.
And kids remind us of that, I think. And they, I've also noticed that kids are much better at thinking outside the box, like we talked about, right? Perfect example, my 5-year-old. So the very first time that I played with him, I had a very simple session where I was like, okay, he meets this guy in this cabin who's lost his hat. A dragon stole his hat. One of the things I did, especially because of his age, it wasn't, I toned down the violence completely. There wasn't really anything that mature. It was just very simple things like, oh, a dragon stole his hat, and so my son had to just go through a series of encounters in the woods, basically making his way to the dragon to find the hat. And every encounter he thought about different. And his first reaction wasn't, "Oh, I'm going to beat them up," or "I'm going to take them out." When he actually got to the dragon, he tried to trick the dragon so that he could sneak up on its back, take the hat, and run away. And I'm sitting there being like, "You need to teach my players how to think outside." Because I had another campaign where, in the middle of a conversation with somebody, the guy's like, "I shoot him," and his assumption was, "Well, we're going to fight, right? We're going to combat," and that was like the default. That combat is the default.
Yeah.
And I've found with kids that that's not their default. They don't automatically think, we got to fight these guys. They're readier to think outside the box and think, well, let's talk to them, or let's trick them, or let's sneak around, or let's do this, let's do that. There's so many other options, and they seem to catch on to that idea a lot easier.
Yeah.
So another thing I think that I learned, again, watching my son, I'm like, I got to remember that, because it was brilliant. It was a proud moment for me as a father and a DM to see my kid thinking outside the box like that. I was like, that's my boy.
and I think as GMs, it's the point. Yeah, exactly. I'm fortunate. I have some players that, even as adults, I mean, one of my guys is older than me, 53, 54.
Yeah.
And his whole character is based on, unless I have to do a sneak attack and damage, I'm going to BS my way around it. And the whole first section of the campaign, he did that. He lied to this one, BS this one, forged on this one.
Yeah.
And I gave him as much, if not more, of the experience, because you never had to lay your hand on a weapon. You did all this by yourself, by just thinking around the box. And even recently, he did the same thing. This tree was meant to attack him when he's going for the Baba Yaga's dagger. And what does he do? He says, "We are the servants of Baba Yaga, and we're here to do this, and we need your help." And did enough and showed enough that the creature had to say, "Okay, the Baba said protect this, but these people are here on behalf of the Baba, so okay,
That's
I'll let
awesome.
you do it. I won't let you do anything else, but I'll let you do this." And they stuck to that, and they kept with it, and the thing never attacked them. And they got the award as if they would have gone to combat and defeated it.
Absolutely.
And I love
that's great.
It's that kind of, but you're right. The kids are always thinking that way.
Absolutely,
and
yeah.
We as adults can learn so much. We really can.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask this. Do you have anything you want to leave, like maybe your Twitter information in case anybody want to get in touch with you and get more ideas from you?
Absolutely. So you can catch me on Twitter at Paragon Games KW. And I've got links on there to, I've written some stuff on the DM's Guild. If you're looking for some alternative death rules, or you want some additional spells, I've got some stuff up there, and I'm going to be putting up more content. Check me out on Twitter at Paragon Games KW. I'm always posting D&D stuff. It's exclusively D&D, so if you're any kind of RPG or D&D nerd, then we'll have fun and chat together. And my last advice for any DM out there is welcome kids to your table. Don't be afraid to let kids play at your table and sit at your table, because it's going to be fun for everybody. And the more kids we can get, the next generation interested in RPGs, the better.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking time out. I think the audience will benefit from this, and I look forward to our next time we're chatting.
Sounds great. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks. Appreciate it.